I'm sorry, apart from the fact I can't get up on the stage, I just really want to use this so that I get your attention. I shall put it to my slide. It's great to be back. I went bike riding, I went to the museum. I'm very sore, but it was fun. So we've got a brand refresh, so we're a little bit new this year. I've written a new book. Last year I was here essentially talking about some major findings that we did, I think, with Think TV the year prior, which kind of looked at the... is that my finish point? Which kind of looked at which platform essentially rose to the top. This year is a little bit different. We're actually going to talk a little bit about the concept of attention. So as you may remember from last year, and I'm going to give you a bit of a background on the technology, at the end of the day, we're researchers, and we have managed to build a system that collects single source data, so whether you viewed, what you bought. But in the meantime, we've built out this really deep technology that enables us to capture human attention. So today is more about the concept of attention, not which platform wins out, but more around things that as marketers you should know, wait for it, that humans, are really quite complex, and at the end of the day, finding causality between a view and a sale is pretty hard. But there are things that we can see within our data that allow advertisers to attract more attention. So I think this presentation is going to be more, less theoretical and more applied. And the two key things, obviously, are tweaks in media, which is a little bit about what I did last year in creative. So hopefully you get some value from today. This is really big. I might put it down. It was funny at first, but it's a bit awkward now. So let me just give you a little bit of a recap. So to cut a very long story short, we have a system that enables us to capture attention passively, which means, let's just say you're in the panel, you were asked to be a part of it, we pay you to be a part of it, you download our app, you then sent to whichever platform you've opted in for. So we've now done Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube. We're building out Snap. We're actually building out Spotify, and we've done about 10 different BVOD platforms. You log in as yourself. We do not collect any personal data whatsoever. You go into, let's just use this example, Instagram, and again, we ask permission. It's double permissions because we're going to intercept your camera, your front-facing camera on your phone. Whoops, hang on, sorry, beg pardon. Then essentially you go to the choice, or the test platform for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, depending on which one it is, and you really don't know what we're doing. So at the back of the platform, we've actually attached JavaScript to the sponsored ad. So that enables us to be able to tell how fast you've scrolled, whether you've moved the phone, like orientated it horizontally, the pixels on screen, the duration of the ad on screen, the coverage of the ad, so that's spatial clutter. The other thing we can do now, which we hadn't done last year, is we can intercept your sound, so we can tell if it's on or off or at what level. And we can either leave the ads what we call in the wild, so they're the ones that you have been targeted with, or we can, as you probably remember from last year, we can actually intercept ad loads. So to ensure that the creative is constant across platforms, if I was testing Instagram value versus YouTube, you need to make sure that the creative is constant so that you're isolating the effects of the platform, so we can actually pull the ad out of Instagram, plonk in an ad like Calvin Klein, for example. In the meantime, the camera is intercepted, and as the ads load, we're basically taking footage or photos, for want of a better word, at 5 frames per second. After the 10 minutes, you then go to a store. Not always, because in the future we're actually building out ongoing mobile attention panels where you won't always go to the store every time. But for the sake of understanding the relationship between attention and sales, we have done this for the last 3 years. You make a choice, and then you're gone, and then you get paid. Well, So all that data then comes back to our central stack. The attention footage is translated mathematically into a score, so we can tell whether you're away looking, whether you're looking at the phone and not the ad, or whether you're looking at the ad. And I don't know if you remember, but we also do a television version, so you can download it on a device. We send you a hardware pack, which is like a tripod, and we stream programming to your big screen, but the camera is still taking footage. So we have done both television and mobile. So that's an important recap, and the reason why it's important is because there's a lot of studies out there. If anyone, again, I keep saying this, remembers from last year, it's really important to us, you know, we're all ex-university, I'm still a professor at Adelaide, that the systems that we build are really, really rigorous and empirically led. Because then then there'll be real results, right? Because my interest is making sure that you have the right information. I don't have any one platform's interest in the back of my results. Right, okay, so this one might be a bit depressing, but what you should understand is that attention as a construct in the age of distraction is not what an average marketer thinks it is. So marketers tend to steal concepts from other sectors, and the reality is, in the age of overload, we're at absolute mental capacity. We filter things out, only let some things in. This means we kind of live in this state of, I call it perpetual zombie, but the actual literature says subconsciousness, but that's boring. So think about how we live. Like, we're sort of so busy. They call it satisficing, and that's from the psychology literature, where you kind of make decisions based on sort of limited information because of the amount of knowledge and information that's around you. You just can't cope with it all. And that's no different to advertising, right? So the reality is most marketers have the wrong notion of how we pay attention to an ad. We don't just sit there and have perfect, active, sustained attention, engagement, whatever you want to call it, to an ad for 30 seconds. That's not how it works. We switch in and out constantly, right? Constantly, no matter what platform. You know, TV's the same, it's both the same. And that's what you would expect, given how busy we are. So I think that's one of the main things you need to think about, is that you really only have a few moments through your campaign or through your ad that gets you any kind of active attention where they're physically looking at it. So there are guidance triggers. I know people are taking photos, but I'm happy to pass out the presentation. There are guidance triggers that can jumpstart this, right? And these are not from my work. We can see them within the data, but this is definitely from long-term psychology literature. And there's these things called bottom-up triggers, which is like unexpectedness, like the fact that you didn't expect me to bring up that stick. That's unexpected, and you were paying attention. Thank you very much. But also things in advertising, it's things like the sound is off or on, depending on if you're expecting it or not. Bright colours, flashing lights, you know, all that kind of... It's a bit like when you're driving a car, although depending on... In Australia, it's pretty quiet, but then the police come screaming up behind you and you weren't expecting it. You know, that's kind of... You go, oh my God, what's going on? So it's kind of unintended attention or noticing. And then there's these other things called top-down triggers, which is more related to relevance. So the reality is relevance does help. So if something... is of familiarity, or you went looking for something, you're more likely to pay notice of it. Okay, so that's true, the reality of relevance, but that's hard to achieve at scale. So most ads are about bottom-up triggers to try and sort of jumpstart these attention spikes. We'll get back to those because I've got a couple of examples. But before I do, now this is again something I would have presented last year, and we see this. We're in 3 countries at the moment, but last year we did it across 3 additional countries, and we see this every year when we do these big work. We see the same results. So if you can't see the ad, guidance triggers won't help. And that's pretty obvious, right? So this whole concept of ad visibility, which I harp on about. So for me, ad visibility is everything from, and I'll get to duration in a minute, but in particular from a visual perspective, pixels, which is proportion of the ad that's on screen, which is part of the MRC standard, and coverage, which is proportion of the screen that the ad covers, right? So coverage is about spatial clutter and what's around it. And what we know is that pixels matter to attention and brand choice. So if you don't notice an ad or you're not looking at it in some capacity, again, if you're not paying any attention whatsoever or not even in the room, clearly it's not going to have the same impact. And again, I often think that that's really quite a basic principle. And we find that screen coverage matters also. So those things are really, so visibility is really, really important. Duration matters too, but less so, right? So don't be fooled into thinking that you have to have an ad, complete. At the end of the day, there are some sweet spots, and TV by far has the longest duration by far on average than all of the other platforms combined. And that's good, but you don't need someone to watch full 30 seconds for them to get the gist of what you're selling, in essence. But it's no surprise that attention varies considerably between platforms, and that is quite frankly because these measures of ad visibility significantly differ by platform. And again, this was kind of in my work last year, so we talked about which platform drove the most return on investment, and we kind of sort of uncovered the whole concept of visibility and duration and coverage then. So TV is 100% of pixels, 100% coverage, 100% of the time. Now, in fairness to the Facebook and Google, which I'm not even going to ask if there's anyone in the audience because I don't want to know. But they've actually improved their functionality, to be honest. So since the work that we did in 2017, they've become MRC compliant, and the level of pixels, coverage isn't in the MRC standards, so level of pixels has actually improved. So that's good news for our industry, that they've pulled their socks up a bit in that space. Nowhere near the same as television, but they've certainly improved their functionality in that way. So low visibility can be the difference between seeing the brand or not. So that's kind of why it matters. Because interestingly, even though we've lived in a digital world for a while, most people don't convert ads to being, really massive on screen. And we know that, the brand, really massive within the ad. We know that brand size and brand frequency and brand entry timing makes a massive difference, but we don't see that often. So what happens is if you have an ad brand to the bottom of the screen, quite often if it's scrolling, you won't even notice what ad it is. So this is where distinctive assets come into it a little bit more, which we'll talk about in a minute. We've talked about time on screen, but there's diminishing returns. So it goes up for a while and then there's this sweet spot. And that sweet spot varies on each platform because some platforms are designed for non-scrolling. So that's obviously going to have a different sweet spot in terms of diminished attention than others. Right, so these unexpectedness triggers. Now remember, they're bottom up. They're about unintentional attention. So I do encourage you to, if you can, get a copy of this book, which is called Unexpectedness, I think, Unexpected. This guy, he's actually a Harvard Med PhD, but he now lives in Australia, and he does this amazing work on understanding how to teach children. Let's all think about that. So he's got a good job, and so he applies the concepts of attention, but looks at how can he make children, how can he get them to engage more and it go into memory and it helps them. So it's funny because we've been on the speaker circuit a couple of times, and our work is almost the same, apart from the end point. So he talks about if you ever want to truly and completely grab an individual's attention, then you must break their predictions. So, for example, if I brought some sort of costume out right now and, you wouldn't expect that of me because, I'm pretty straight looking. When a prediction fails, the brain becomes primed to take in new information. So this is a really important thing. I'm not a creative person at all. So how you do that is an art unto itself. There are a couple of things we can see in the data. But there's an example of unexpectedness. So I don't know if you've seen many of these campaigns, but that's what you expect Colonel Sanders to look like. You don't expect him to look like that. So I know these campaigns have gone global and they've got all these different iterations of hot Colonel Sanders. That gets your attention, gets my attention anyway. So we kind of look at emotion as an unexpectedness trigger. And if anyone knows my first book, I looked at content diffusion. So, with the whole concept of viral, the book actually debunked the myth, which is a really bad analogy right now, but that's okay. It debunked the myth that it was anything like a virus. As you will know, every day you see on CNN that there's lots of people getting it and the diffusion of it is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So the curve, it starts here with a couple of people and it goes massive, right? That's a true virus, that's an epidemic. But in content, it's the other way around. So it actually diffuses negatively. But part of what helps content diffusion is emotions. So we looked at what we could in the data to see if attention and emotions were related as well. And emotions have been long noted as sparking kind of behavioural outcomes. So this is the construct that we use. So it's high negative, so it's negative and positive valence, which is obvious, opposites, and pairs within that. So high arousal, low arousal, positive pairs. So we use this construct because it's probably the most methodologically sound, because it gives people a point to sort of anchor to. So just by way, high arousal emotions are those that cause a physiological response. So, the hair stands up on your arm, or you snort because it's laughing so much, or you're crying. So what we did find was that high arousal content definitely drives more attention and brand choice than low arousal. So this was not surprising to us because it is in essence considered, you don't always expect something to be funny. It's a bit like once you've seen it, you don't kind of notice it much after that because it was only funny the first time, or emotional the first time, or inspiration the first time. But I will say, quite off topic, many people think that creative devices are the trigger, like the dog, but some animals are boring, right? So it's more about the context of the talent and what they're doing than the talent itself, in most cases. Okay, so this is an important point too. So we do see a relationship. So my business is moving much more towards collecting attention data for the purpose of planning models. So I'm a big advocate and scholar of attention as a measure that is fair and transparent cross-platform. However, just because you pay attention doesn't necessarily mean you're going to buy something. And I think that's an important distinction, right? Many people out there trying to sell attention as a part of their business will go, someone will buy, it's an intention or it's an engagement point. That's not how we look at it. So I kind of talk about the two being related in terms of cousins, not siblings. So it's second generation, not directly causal. And the reason why, let's sort of putting it in a different way, we see attention spikes are triggered by these unexpectedness moments, typically, but not all of the time does that attention translate to a sale. And here's why. Because advertising is not persuasive. Just because I notice something doesn't mean I'm going to drop everything and buy something, or make a choice to buy something, or intend. And the other thing is, most ads fail to link the ad to the brand at all, right? Let alone at the attention point. I'll show you some examples. Clearly that's an Australian brand. So it's a high arousal. So we've got a few. We don't have many Australian customers, but this one is this is a huge Australian company. So I'd like you to tell me what category this is, let alone, you're not going to know the brand because the brand is not really known here. But what category is that? I can't even understand. Someone has to translate. Say it again. Everyone says that. It's insurance. Did anyone think that? Oh, you did? Well, it's kind of a bit of a bad example because the fires, the animals, I mean, although this ad was put together well over a year ago. But what we could find when we tested their advertising, which is not normally our thing, we had a look at the attention spikes, and by far that was the most, like it just rose straight up in terms of an attention spike. But there's no branding, right? So what we know is that when the presence of branding occurs at the attention spike, the chance of buying is significantly greater. Again, it's not really rocket science. If you give someone a moment of opportunity to pay attention, you should put your brand there. Just saying. So sales are amplified when attention peaks and branding are aligned. Oh wait, I need my stick for the next slide. Right, we ready? Because our brains are trained to satisfy us, this means now you have to do with this with me, people. Ready? When the... Correct. Right? So you just need the context. You can read around that. So what this means, okay, so bearing in mind I'm from Ehrenberg-Bass principles, the attention you work so hard for is likely to be misattributed to your biggest competitor, unless you're number one in the category, right? So that's a double jeopardy effect. So if you miss things, we fill in the blanks. And we go, well, that's an insurance brand, it must be for this person. Well, actually, it's not, it's for this person. So you have to be super careful. So I often say that quality branding is perhaps one of the most underrated variables of success. So some good news is what we can see in the data is that low attention processing punches above its weight in terms of impact. Now what that means is because we are trained to sort of understand context, rather than have to physically look at something to be able to understand it, what we can see in the data is that the greatest uplift in sales actually occurs between no attention or pre-attention and low. So it means even though high attention garners the most sales, or in this case it's choice, there's still a massive uplift between being around it. Now we're still trying to work out how that relates to sound and how all the variables fit in. But so there is good news that even if you understand something or see something passively and haven't looked directly at it, it has an impact. I want you to have a look at this video. Or not.
Oh my God.
There's nothing you can really do about it because you don't even realise it's happening.
It's just scary. Do you want to just leave that envelope there, by the way? Here's your menu. Give you a couple of minutes, all right?
2 for a calamari with.
What are you thinking? Triple dipped chicken.
Triple
dipped.
Triple dipped chicken, please.
This envelope was given to you before you made your choice, right?
Yeah.
Are you being for real? Oh my God.
That's just crazy.
There was other things that I wanted on this menu.
That's so weird. How did you do that?
I just want to know how.
I've seen that.
Dr. Alex, the guy from Love Island.
Yesterday, I saw this on my feed. I was thinking he's a doctor, but he's eating greasy food.
It's Anton. I saw that when I looked on his thing as well.
Big smile afterwards, like, that was delicious.
Oh, wow.
Scrolled right past, didn't even like it, but that is so weird.
Hello.
Triple dip chicken. You can't resist.
Oh, wow.
I didn't even notice that.
That's crazy.
I didn't notice that on the seats, actually. I'm not going to lie to you.
I remember like the colours more so than the actual thing on it.
Oh, yeah. I didn't even notice.
That was on the wall as well.
I can't remember it.
I don't remember that.
Really, it's like subconsciously. You're playing tricks in your mind.
I suppose it all really does influence you then, doesn't it?
I think this method of marketing in the food industry is wrong.
That's another story. But the point being that they weren't actively viewing, but they still were influenced to some degree by the campaign, albeit that it was only 8 in the sample. But that's a classic example of priming. You would have seen videos like that before. So this is why distinctive assets are even more important, right? So let's just agree that gone are the days where we build this epic creative and we take people on a journey and then we finally show them the brand at the end. At the end of the day, we have to make our ads more distinctive than ever because we fill in the blanks, right? And distinctive assets, as you will know, are things from colour to, funny animals to logo to Colonel Sanders. So make it easy for people to recognise the brand even in a divided or zombie attention state, because that's the way we're going to stay. We're not going to get any less busy. And this is a really important point that actually Jared Horvath makes. He sort of talks about the fact that attention and memory are not the same thing. So if you are ever doing any studies on attention, do not allow them to test recall, right? Recall is a memory-based measure. Attention and memory are not the same. Recall, there's a whole lot of theoretical issues with it anyway, but you have to extract that from your memory, and that's just not how advertising works. Whereas attention is about familiarity and priming, which is why we use choice, because you just go to a shelf and you just pick one, and half the time you don't know why. So none of this matters, this is my last point, if the impression's not human. And this is an interesting and political point, which in fact Dr. Augustine Fu, who's from New York, talks about, and he does a section in my book. But the fraud problem is larger than you think. And I'm not pointing the finger, but we have a long tail of really bad web properties that has something like, I think the WFA talked, and that's in 2017. I was at a conference the other day where the chair and the CEO of the WFA was saying, it's getting worse. And there's a few that predict an ad crash. I know that we can't probably cope with that given the coronavirus right now for the economy, but there's an ad crash coming, or an ad tech crash coming. And platforms are so filled with stacking and fake shares and fake abs and all that sort of stuff. And then there's duplicate accounts and things like that. So there's so many issues relating to humans actually being exposed. So my agenda is about impression reform. I think that there's a big role to play for us all. So I often look at today's impressions are based on an incomparable and diluted measure, which we all know that. In fact, not that I speak your language, but I kind of got the sense that new measures are coming or being built or needed in the last presentation. When many are not human or not seen, our trading currency is without a doubt failing advertisers. And in my world, I see and hear that all the time. There's a cry out for new measures that offer validation to our traditional reach and frequency. So back to the start, I look at attentive reach as a layered construct, so meaning that you have to have them all for it to be functional. So if you only have ad visibility plus something creative or an attention trigger, but you don't have quality branding, then it's going to be misattributed to the competitor. If you only have ad visibility and quality branding, you'll have limited cut through because people won't pay attention to it, right? If you only have quality branding and attention trigger and it's hardly visible, it could be easily, there's no point. But this one is the biggie, no human, no point. So they're the 4 things you should be thinking about to make an ad effective. So creative things, platform things, human validation. Oh, and there's my book. It was so much fun to write. And, I did it, some nights I got up like 3 o'clock in the morning to do it. So there's some really crazy, funny, weird, things in there. I won't go into it, but some interesting, weird, funny things. So I finish on, remember this simple truth that in an attention economy, not all reach is equal, which is sort of what I said last year, but we talked a little bit more specifically about it this year. So thank you for having me again.